You're watching a Sunday Agenda, where Paul Kelly and I are talking to the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, joining us live from Tamworth. Barnaby Joyce, let me ask you about healthcare policy, if I can. I know that the government, yourself, the Prime Minister, very upset about the Medicare scare campaign and the elements of it that were just so blatantly false around things like privatisation, for example. But having said that, in his first media conference post the result, the PM did say that it's incumbent now on the government to regain the trust of voters in the space of healthcare. How do you do that? Is something like the 6-year freeze on the Medicare rebate something in a policy sense that should be back on the table?
Well, the first thing is the Labor Party have formed a new tactic, and that is basically you lie to people. There's no privatisation of Medicare, so I don't know. If this becomes the way of politics in the future, we'll all have a competition of who can tell the biggest lie. Not even a hidden lie, just an out-and-out lie. But so now, nonetheless, the lie found resonance. So we've got to make sure that people clearly understand that we give our best endeavours to make sure that universal form of healthcare remains, and that we have an economy that can pay for it. Ultimately, we've got no intentions at all of privatising Medicare. It's just the most mad thing. I don't know why they didn't say we're going to sell Tasmania. That'd be another great lie.
But what has to happen, though, Barnaby Joyce? I mean, the PM acknowledged that you do, despite the lack of reality around that side of the scare campaign, he did acknowledge that something needs to happen going forward to be able to regain voter trust on health. What can you do? Is that just words, or does there need to be some policy shifting?
No, it's just making sure people clearly understand by the time we get to the next election in 3 years' time that there's no intention whatsoever to privatise Medicare, and that our role as a government is to make sure that we do everything within our power to have an economy strong enough to support our capacity to have that medical payments are supplied by the taxpayer through the conduit of government, that we make sure we're able to educate our people, provide healthcare for our people. But the big issue about that is you can only do that with a strong economy and a strong set of books. The government itself has no money. It has your money or borrowed money. And we've got to make sure that we manage the books in such a way as we provide all those requirements that the Australian people ask for. And that's one of the hard parts of government. I saw the Labor Party and the Greens making all these promises, but you actually got to show how you're going to pay for it. Now, I believe, to answer your question, the source of providing that trust is to say, this is how we manage our books, this is how we provide the money, there the money is, there's your requirement, that pays for that, and that's the most honest answer you can give. The Labor Party answer is, this is what you want, we've got no idea where we're going to get the money from, so we'll borrow it. Borrow it from, from the Chinese, from the people in the Middle East, from London or wherever. And people, I think, are wise up to that, and they say, well, that's unsustainable.
What's your impression about the National Party seats? Do you think that Medicare was the number one issue? Do you think it was the number one issue in the National Party seats or not?
Oh, Paul, the problem with it was just such a lying, insidious campaign. They would ring up vulnerable people literally late at night and say, did you know that Paul is your local member, is going to privatise Medicare and cut your pension? And I think they have even a better trick than that. They just ring up after 10:30, 11:30 at night and say they were Paul, just to annoy people. This is the sort of the get up campaign. It's just premised around a lie. And what do you do with that? What do you do when someone rings up vulnerable people late at night and lies to them? How does one campaign against that? And people rightly...
Well, the government is going to have to address this. I mean, the Prime Minister has signalled that the government will look at Medicare in the coming term. We don't know what they'll do, but is it your view that there should be policy changes, particularly in relation to things such as the Medicare rebate, in order to reassure people?
Well, we'll do whatever we can, Paul. But there's nothing. Ultimately, what do you do against a person who lies? What is the policy settings that you put down in place to combat against people who lie? I don't know what you do with that.
Would you like to see some truth in political, maybe truth in political advertising, Barnaby Joyce? I mean, other countries do have some of that. Would you like to explore ways of doing that?
Maybe those things should be explored. I don't know what else you'd do. Send them to church on Sunday morning. Tell them to go talk to their mum and dad again. How do you tell someone that they shouldn't lie?
On the Medicare issue, though, what about the Medicare levy. It nowhere near covers the cost in that particular health program space. The government is committed to removing the deficit levy. It was temporary. That will continue as part of your policy at the election. An increase in the Medicare levy is something that I know some sections of the crossbenchers have talked about being willing to support. Would the government consider that?
Look, these are all hypotheticals, and we really let's have Mr. Shorten come out and say he's lost the election. He can tell the truth. He can do that today. Show us that he can tell the truth. Say, look, fellas, I don't think I've won the election. In fact, I had an absolute train wreck of a campaign. And then after that, we can get down to Canberra, form a government, and explore these and so many other issues.
In past years, it's a common knowledge that you didn't have a terribly good relationship with Malcolm Turnbull. What are relations like now?
Oh, we'll get along very well. You know, I was speaking to Malcolm this morning, we do have a cordial relationship. In the past, if we had differences, it was on policy, never on personalities. I get along on a personal level. I get along very well with him.
So are you mates or not?
Yeah, I think we get along well. I mean, I'm mates, but you have to ask Malcolm. I'm not going to, you know, there's two in a relationship, but I get along very well with him. Now, that's my statement about the relationship, and you know how relationships work. You've got to ask the other partner, but I'm certain he'll say the same.
Okay, what about Tony Abbott? Obviously, this is going to be a big issue in terms of what happens to Tony Abbott, and I know this is an issue in the Liberal Party, but clearly it's also an issue which affects the entire stability of the government, the coalition. What's your view about what should happen to Tony Abbott? Would you like to see him come back to the front bench?
Well, I get along with Tony too. I'd never see this as a binary argument. Tony has immense experience as former Prime Minister, and you know that's a question that's out of my bailiwick. I'm in the National Party. If he was in the National Party, I'd happily talk to you about what could happen and his position. But
well, if he was in the National Party, would you put him on the front bench?
Oh, I'd hand him over my job. No, no. Look, he's not in the National Party, and as much as the National Party could try and make some claim to why Warringah is a strong pastoral seat, I don't think we'll get there. So that's a question. The Libs will work that out. That's their bag of marbles. I'll let them play with it.
But is there a problem here, having a former Prime Minister like Tony Abbott staying on the backbench?
Well, Tony Abbott is always going to have an immense contribution to public life because he's been a previous Prime Minister. But I'm not going to go into the hypotheticals because really, first of all, that's a question for Tony Abbott and a question for the Liberal Party. I'm not going to answer for either of them because I'm neither Tony Abbott nor the Liberal Party. So I'll let them answer their own questions about their business.
Okay, let's go to Pauline Hanson. How much damage did Hanson do to the National Party?
Well, certainly her Senate vote is not escalating as much as we thought. She's certainly going to get herself a senator in Queensland, and I hope that Ms Hanson has now been elected by the people, no doubt about that. And you must respect the right of the people that they've made that choice, and therefore I respect the process of democracy that has allowed Ms Hanson to be elected. Now she might be probably a slightly more ready for the political debate than the first time where she came in sort of green off the street. She understands politics well and truly. I'm just hoping that we have a form of politics that doesn't start polarising Australian people. We are a very egalitarian nation. I do a lot of trade on behalf of the Australian people, especially in agricultural products all around the world. And I find people generally decent, no matter, if you give people a space to be decent, that's exactly what they are. And I won't go make any further judgments about Ms Hanson until Ms Hanson speaks for herself.
But having said that, though, Barnaby Joyce, it's true, isn't it, that the calling of a double dissolution election has let the One Nation genie out of the bottle. She never would have won a seat if it hadn't been for that full dissolution of the Senate.
Well, she might have gone close in Queensland. She's had, give credit where credit's due. She had a strong result in Queensland, but now that's you've got to. I'm not going to start talking about Ms Hanson. You've got to ask this question: why do people vote, and what are their issues? and let's address their issues. Let's not start saying, oh, well, let's persecute the personality. Talk about the issues, find out what they are, what are people's concerns. We're doing everything in this nation. That's why it's so important to have strong borders, because you've got to make sure that you give people a sense of confidence that you're running the show. And to borrow from John Howard, you're determining who turns up. And if you don't do that, then there's more fertile ground for people to start voting for a more definite outcome. Now, I believe that we are managing that outcome. I believe we do have strong borders. I think we're doing a good job. I think we have strong controls over the sort of social harmony in this nation. I don't think we've been afflicted by the problems we're seeing elsewhere in the world, and so I'm pretty happy with the way our nation is, and I'm also very proud of the fact that we're a very generous nation. We allow people who are in strife somewhere else in the world to come to our nation. Now, in balancing those two things, that's where I want to be. The polarising aspect of starting to point fingers at people, I don't like, because once you start pointing fingers at one group, they'll start pointing fingers back, and it all ends in tears.
Okay, well, this is an important issue. The issue here is how the political system deals with Pauline Hanson. And 20 years ago, when she was in politics, this was a real fundamental problem. Now, Malcolm Turnbull did say that she wouldn't be welcomed in the Parliament. So, from your perspective, what is the way you deal and relate to Pauline Hanson?
Well, I mean, I've been in the Senate. Every person, you know, no matter how hard they might be playing the game of football in the chamber, once they get out in the corridor, people are civil to one another, and that's the way a nation has to work. I respect the right of the people who have elected Ms Hanson. They had every right to vote the way they did. They've made that choice. She is elected. You must respect that, and I will. But of course, we must also govern for a nation. We must also make sure our nation has the capacity to pay its bills, defend itself, provide the medical facilities that people need, educate their children. All these things must be done in the running of a nation, and therefore we need a Senate that also respects that mandate of the people, and also the purpose of a government, which ultimately is to have, you know, the smooth management of the nation. Now, I'm sure Ms Hanson, like everybody else who's elected, Nick Xenophon and all others, understand that, and hopefully the vast majority of the discussion is doing that. There'll be certain issues from time to time which accentuate the sort of the extremities of a debate, and they will arise. But if they dominate the Parliament, then it'll be a negative place. If we can just concentrate on the management of our nation, then that's a better outcome that I think we should be focusing on.
There was a National Party report on what transpired at the election that The Australian had exclusively during the course of the week, in the wake of the results, critical of the way that the Liberal campaign was run and crafting out how it was that the Nats were able to do things differently. Is this a point where perhaps there needs to be a convergence between the two coalition partners for the next time that campaigning is put underway, to ensure that similar Liberal mistakes don't happen again?
Well, look, it's horses for race course, and I'm at a race course at the moment. Horses for race courses, and the way you campaign in regional areas is definitely different to the way you campaign in urban areas. I think there is something to be said that the way that you sell a message in central Queensland is not the same as the way you sell a message in urban Sydney or Melbourne. They're different areas and they're different constituencies, and that's why the role of the local member is so paramount, that they have to understand the message that is pertinent to the people who are going to vote for them. We don't have a presidential system. There is no presidents of the United States of Australia. It doesn't exist. We have a parliamentary system, and parliamentary systems work on the fact that there is a greater say in how that local member represents himself to his or her community. And I had to do that in New England, and Michelle had to do that in Capricornia, and Kenny had to do that in Flynn, and Lou O'Brien had to do that in Wide Bay, and Damien Drum did it down there in Murray. I mean, that ultimately makes a difference. Otherwise, you could just put all your candidates in a box.
But Barnaby Joyce, on that, you say that, you know, it's not a presidential system, and you're absolutely right. That's why local sandbagging of seats can be so effective, and it looks like the National Party are going to do that for the first time and win consecutive elections in Capricornia, for example, with the way the count's going. Yep. But let me take you to that very presidential seal that was always behind Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. It looked like the presidential seal. It was different to the usual logo that was in place. Was that a mistake?
Well, look, that's for a discussion down the track, and I'm sure everybody will be having that discussion at a time when we're all settled in. Look, to be honest, Peter, I think the Australian public has a healthy sense of cynicism, and you can't try and play a game in front of them that they're not reading through. Ultimately, if it's the same as it is in New England and other seats, they go to the booth, to their ballot box, with two ideas in mind: who is the most likely team best able to manage the nation, and what do I think of my local candidate? And those two issues are reflected in the vote you get. And I also saw it in some of the polling. Some of the polling was just miles out because people were so polled out that they just started giving up and not answering the robo polls and not talking to people. So that some of the polls are wildly different to what we actually expected, because people have that healthy dose of cynicism. They say, look, actually it's my own business and I'll work this out. And they make decisions on their local candidate and also on the management team at a national level. But they're not stupid. They know there's no President of Australia.
Following the decision last year of the joint parties, Malcolm Turnbull took to this election the promise for a plebiscite on same-sex marriage, saying that there would be no parliamentary vote until there was a plebiscite, giving the Australian people the chance to express their own views. How committed is the National Party to this central proposition which Malcolm Turnbull put at the election, that there must be a plebiscite before any parliamentary vote?
Well, this thing has been done and dusted. There'll be a plebiscite of the Australian people, and that way I get one vote, Paul, you get one vote, Peter gets one vote, all the viewers, you all get one vote. We're all as powerful as each other. No one is more supremely powerful and has a greater say in where the nation goes on this issue. And I think, and we polled ourselves, overwhelmingly, that's what the Australian people want. That's what they want when you ask them. They want the plebiscite. And so I believe that it'll go through the lower house, that people will be voting for a plebiscite, and the senators who've just been elected, who have just been talking to the Australian people, they will vote for the plebiscite as well, because that's what the Australian people want, and they're there first and foremost to serve the Australian people. I think it'd be a very brave person who says, well, I think I know better than the people who just elected me into this job. But that would be a remarkable turn of events.
That was a pretty strong answer. Is this the sort of provision that you might include in a new coalition agreement?
Well, look, as I said, the coalition agreement, and as much as I admire your investigatory role, is a confidential agreement, and so I'll know about it, and Malcolm will know about it, and not many other people. In fact, that's about it.
We'd really appreciate a good background briefing on the agreement pretty soon after it's negotiated.
I think you need Laurie Oakes for that, don't you? You need one who can dig all this out, put it in the paper for us.
Oh, before we run out of time, though, Barnaby Joyce, I want to ask you, in the context of the plebiscite, okay, we've established the plebiscite rather than a free vote, but there's no guarantee that the Parliament will authorise the plebiscite. Now, without getting into the nitty-gritty of the inappropriateness or otherwise of that, if that happens, the government can still have a plebiscite, but you can't make it compulsory. You need the passage through the Parliament for it to be a compulsory plebiscite. What's your view? I mean, you must have a view. Well, if it doesn't get through the Parliament, do you still have it as a non-compulsory vote?
I'm going to start with first principles, okay? The Australian people want a plebiscite. The Australian people have gone to an election and voted for it, knowing that that's the policy of the government. If someone then goes out and says, well, I've got a different view, well, that is going to be an interesting election they have in the next at the next term they get. Remembering that with senators now, they can put a number beside your name and kick you out. And it's a different ball game now. So I think that the plebiscite will get through both houses. The next thing I'll say is, honestly, it's very important for the people it involves, but it is not the issue that is brought up with you on the street. It just isn't. It just doesn't. It's not out there. There are so many other things that are out there and discussed, but this is not front and centre politics. It is in Canberra, but it's not out there. And so I think we give it vastly more colour and movement and vastly more oxygen than it actually gets out in the street. Whatever the Australian people decide in that plebiscite will be respected. It's their choice. And let's just leave it at that. The Australian people will have their say and we'll respect it.
You may be right on that in terms of where it sits on the priority list, but the Attorney-General, George Brandis, to us on Australian agenda. The Prime Minister subsequently did say they'd like to see it happen this year. Do you agree with that?
Well, let's, once more, we said in the next term of government, there'll be a plebiscite. That's it. We keep on going over and over in this. Look, half the people, while we're talking about this, honest to God, they're making a cup of tea. They're looking for something else. Look, you got to talk about the things that they're interested in.
Well, we're going to give you a chance to do exactly that as well. You've been generous with your time. Barnaby Joyce, Deputy Prime Minister, appreciate you joining us on Sunday Agenda. Thanks for your company.
You're welcome, Peter. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers.